In today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys a complete crash course in Flutter development. I'm going to be holding your hand and taking you through all of the concepts you need to know to go from a complete beginner in Flutter development to somebody who is confident using this framework. We're going to be developing a recipe application, which is going to work on both iOS and Android, and the actual things that I teach you can also be replicated if you want to build apps for the web or desktop using Flutter. So let's firstly take a look at the actual application that we're going to be building, and then I'll also talk about the concepts that you're going to be learning throughout this video. So first things first, our recipe application is going to present us with a login page. Our application is going to support logging in using an actual API, sending a network request with our credentials, and then getting a JWT token back. If for some reason our login isn't successful, for example, we do not provide the correct username, then our actual login operation is going to fail, and it's going to give us a prompt letting us know that, hey, the operation failed. But if the actual credentials are correct and we log in, it's going to take us from this page to our actual recipe book page where we can see a list of all of the recipes that we can actually create, or cook, I should say. At the top, we're going to have a filter, which is going to allow us to filter these recipes by the actual meal type. And all of this information is then again going to be retrieved from an actual API. And these filters are also going to work with the network requests in tandem. And when we update the filters, then the actual information that is displayed will also be updated. So let's just say that I want to view lunch options. If I click on lunch, it's going to send another network request and only ask for meal types that are lunches. Once we are comfortable with an actual recipe that we've decided we want to cook, we can click on it and it's going to navigate us to the actual recipes detail page where we'll be able to actually see an image of the actual recipe and some more information with regards to what the ingredients for this recipe are, how to actually make this recipe, the reviews, what the prep time is, the cook time is, the title, as well as what the actual region for this dish is, as well as how complicated it is to actually create. So throughout building this application, you're going to be learning everything you need to know about Flutter. We'll talk about how to initialize a Flutter project. Then from there, we'll move onwards to talking about what the fundamental concepts of Flutter are, how Flutter works. We'll talk about widgets, state management, network requests, how to work with forms, what different widgets are available to you, and how you can use them to display information in different ways within your application. We're also going to be talking about navigation and everything else that you need to know, such as, for example, coding your product using good coding standards so that it's easily maintainable. The actual use of external packages within this actual tutorial is going to be kept to the bare minimum, and we're going to be using everything that comes with Flutter out of the box to achieve most of this functionality, because I want to show you guys all of the things that you can achieve with just Flutter. There are situations where you might want to replace certain elements of Flutter with something else that can maybe better address these issues, such as, for example, state management or navigation. But for now, we're not going to be delving into it. So this is going to be something that even beginners can start with, and it's going to be an excellent tutorial that you guys are going to enjoy a lot. So to get started, the first thing that I'm going to let you guys know is that the only prerequisite for this tutorial is that you have Flutter installed on your system and set up correctly. If you are confused as to how to do this, I already have tutorials for this on my channel for both Mac OS and Windows, so you can take a look at them. Links to them will be on the screen as well as down in the description below. So take a look at them and then you'll be up to speed. But once you have Flutter set up, then you and I are at the same starting position. So let's get going. So the first thing that we want to do is actually create an empty Flutter project, or initialize the project, I should say, that then we can code in. So to do that, what you're going to be doing is actually opening up Terminal, or if you're using Windows, you can open up PowerShell, and then basically you're going to be navigating to an actual folder where you want to place your Flutter code. In my case, what I want to do is actually place this code within a folder on my desktop. So what I'm going to be doing is doing CD, which stands for change directory. It should work on both Mac OS and Windows. I'm going to go to desktop, and then from there, I'm going to go into a folder called development and press enter. Now I'm within this development folder. So here, what I'm going to be doing is actually using the Flutter create command. But before I do that, I'd like to quickly mention that if you guys are confused at any point, I've left a link to the source code for the complete project down in the description of this video, so feel free to take a look at it if you're confused at any point. So before we actually use Flutter create, let's actually talk about the other useful commands that might come in handy when you're actually following along with this tutorial. So one thing I recommend is that you make sure that your Flutter version is as close to mine as possible by doing flutter space dash dash and then version. And as you can see, I'm on Flutter version 3.19.0. So any 3.19 version doesn't matter, it's 0 or a minor version of 3.19 should work. So if you are facing a lot of errors or things like that when you're following along, then I'd recommend that maybe you downgrade or upgrade to the Flutter version that I have. Once this is done, the next thing that we're going to be doing is also talking about the Flutter Doctor command, which you can do by doing Flutter and then doctor. And what this command basically does is that it analyzes your Flutter installation and lets you know if there are any problems before you actually proceed with this tutorial or actually any Flutter development. So as you can see, I can see that practically there are no issues with my actual Flutter installation, besides the fact that it's telling me that I'm browsing on the local area network. But that's nothing that we have to worry about. As you can see, I have ticks for everything, so we can continue. So now that we've basically taken this out of the way, let's initialize and create our Flutter project. So to create my Flutter project, what I'm going to be doing is doing Flutter create, and then I'm going to be giving my project a name. In this case, I'm going to do recipes_app, and then I'm going to press enter. And as soon as I press enter, what's going to happen is that this command is going to run and it's going to initialize an empty Flutter project for me. Once this is done, what you can do is actually just close down Terminal or PowerShell, whatever you're using. We don't need it anymore. And you can open up Visual Studio Code. And once you've opened up Visual Studio Code, all you can do is navigate into the folder where you created the Flutter project and then drag and drop in your actual project within Visual Studio Code like so. And once you've done, what you're going to see is that you're going to be presented with a code base that's going to be similar to what you're seeing here. Here, the only thing that you should be concerned with for now is the lib folder. And this is the folder where all of our source code for our application is going to go. For now, if you went into this folder, you're going to see that we only have the main.dart file, and this is the starting point of our application. And specifically within our main.dart file, we have a function called main. And the main function is the basic entry point for our application when we actually start running it. And from main, we call a function called runApp. If you hover over it, as you can see, it tells that it inflates the given widget and attaches it to the screen. So runApp basically runs our actual application and then attaches it to the screen. And then here we pass in the actual application that we want to run. So this is the basic flow of how our Flutter application actually starts up. So before we proceed with anything else, let's quickly talk about how Flutter works. Now, there are many frameworks that are out there for mobile development. The most famous one besides Flutter is React Native. So if you come from the React Native world, you might already know how React Native works, but Flutter works in a totally different way. Flutter basically works like a game engine. All of the pixels on the screen are actually generated by the Flutter framework, and we do not rely upon any underlying components of the actual native system that we are running our application on to actually produce graphics on the screen. So all of this is handled by Flutter. So Flutter looks totally different than React Native. In React Native, you might have heard that you define some kind of an element, and then that element gets mapped to the native system element on which your application is running. That's not how Flutter works. Flutter works like a game engine where the whole framework is responsible for every pixel on the screen, and the framework itself determines what to draw on the screen and then display to the user. So to help us in developing apps, what the Flutter team has done is actually given us some packages that we can import within our actual project that can allow us to show to the user certain UI elements that are designed to certain standards, namely being the Material UI system and the Cupertino UI system. So the Material Design System is the system of design that is incorporated by Google, and that's the design language that Google uses within their products. And then on the other hand, we have Cupertino, which is also a package that you can import, and this is a design language that Apple uses within the products that they build. So if you want your application to have a feel and vibe similar to how Android apps look, then you might want to go with Material. If you want to have your application have a look or feel similar to native iOS apps, then you might want to go for a Cupertino package. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about the Material package. So basically, our UI elements that we are going to be working with are going to basically mimic the design of the actual Material design that is created by Google. So now the next step in our discussion is going to be talking about widgets, which are the most important concepts when it comes to Flutter development, in my opinion. A widget is a key component of the user interface in Flutter. Widgets are used to describe the structure and layout of your application's UI elements, such as buttons, text field, images, containers, and we'll take a look into these. And the UI is rebuilt when the widget tree changes because Flutter is built on a reactive architecture. So what is a widget tree? Well, Flutter apps, as I had alluded to before, are constructed using a hierarchy of widgets. And this hierarchy of widgets, this composition of widgets, is known as a widget tree. At the very top of our widget tree, we have a material app if you're using the material package, as you can see here. Or we might have a Cupertino app if you were using the Cupertino package. We're using the material app here. So this is at the very top of our actual widget tree. And then we have widgets nested within this. And then this tree of widgets actually constructs the UI of our application. And this is how basically widgets work in a nutshell. There are much more details that I can get into, but for now, this understanding should be sufficient enough for you. So now with this done, let's do this. Let's actually take everything that's in our main.dart file besides the actual main function, and let's actually remove it. So to do that, what I'm going to be doing is basically removing everything in this file. And then now we're just left with a main function, which is calling run app, which expects us to pass it a widget that then is going to get displayed on the screen. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be creating a widget, and this widget is going to be called my app. So how do we create widgets? Well, there are two types of widget within Flutter. One is a stateful widget and one is a stateless widget. Stateless widget basically refers to widgets that do not change their state, do not change the data that's within them. While stateful widget refers to widgets that the data within them changes during the life cycle of your application. For now, what we're going to be doing, and usually what happens is that the very top level widget within your actual widget tree is usually a stateless widget, and widgets within them can be stateful widgets, so the data within them can change. But at the very top level, we don't need a stateful widget. So let's create a class, let's call it my app, and let's say that this extends a stateless widget. Once this is done, you're going to see that it gives me an error saying that we are missing a concrete implementation of the stateless widget.build function. So let's do that. So to do that, you can quickly hover over this, click on quick fix, and then say create one missing override. And this is basically going to create the build function. And this build function needs to be defined because we are extending our stateless widget class. A build function on an actual widget defines how that widget is built. And this is exactly what now we're going to be doing. So what I want to do is that within my build function, instead of throwing an unimplemented error, I want to return a widget. And what is the root widget within our widget tree going to be? Well, it's going to be a material app. I'll press enter, and that's pretty much it. And if I hover over this, you're going to see that it basically tells me all of the different actual parameters that this material app takes within its constructor. And at the very bottom, it tells us that this creates a material app. So the material app is basically going to lay the foundation of our widget tree. It's going to lay the foundation of our application. And then now we're going to be nesting widgets within this to actually create our application. So let's get going with what our material app is going to look like. The first thing that I'm going to be doing is giving it a title. And the title in this case is going to be our recipe book app. So I called it recipe book, like so. Once this is done, I'm also going to be giving some theme information to my material app. So this theme information is basically going to let the material app know what the color scheme and the other visual composition styling for my application is going to be like. So this, if I hover over this, you can see is going to expect an instance of an object passed to it, which is of type theme data. So let's instantiate a theme data object. And as the name suggests, this basically defines the theming for our application. Within this, I'm going to say that we're going to define the color scheme of our application, and that is going to be color scheme dot from seed. And then I'm going to give it a seed color, which in my case is going to be colors dot deep orange. So this is basically going to generate the color scheme for my application from a seed color that I pass, which is colors dot deep orange. Then besides this, I'm going to set the use material tree property to be true. So this means that we're going to be using material components that are basically going to reference or adhere to the standards of material 3. And then I'm going to set the app bar theme. And for now, let's just set the app bar theme, and then we'll actually discuss what the app bar is. So I'll say that here I'm going to define app bar theme like so. And I'm going to say that within my app bar, I want to change the text styling for the title. And then this is going to be text style like so. And here I'm going to do color is colors.black. The font size is 25. And then the font weight is font weight.bold like so. And that's pretty much all we have to do. And then I'll do command save. Now you can see that it's giving me an error saying that I can add const with the constructor to improve performance. So let's add the const keyword and let's do command save. And there we go. So now if I try to run my application, there is going to be an issue. And that is that for now, our material app is not going to know what it should display on the screen. So for that, we basically need to set the home property for our material app. So on my material app, after I've defined the theme, I'm going to define the home property. And this home property for now is going to be nothing because we haven't created an actual widget that we'd like to display when our actual material app is then rendered on screen. So let's actually create a widget. Well, for this, what I'll do is that to keep my code maintainable and organize my code, I'm going to go under the lib folder. I'm going to create a new folder here called pages, underneath of which I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this login page.dart. Then within this, I'm going to say that I'm going to create a class. It's going to be called login page, and it's going to extend. And you need to now guess, is it going to be a stateless widget or a stateful widget? Well, this time we're going to be using a stateful widget. And the reason for that is because we are going to be managing some data, some state within this actual widget, and that's going to change during the life cycle of our actual widget. So that's why we need to implement a stateful widget. So for that, I'll say stateful widget, and then I'll open up the actual class definition. And this stateful widget comes from the material package as well. Then an actual stateful widget requires us to actually implement a concrete implementation of the function create state, similar to how we did for build. So let's create this implementation. And what create state basically does is that it defines how the state for this widget is created. So to make this work, what I need to do is create another class, and this is going to be called underscore login page state. So this class basically manages the state of our login page widget, and we are using an underscore before the name of our actual class to mark it as a private class, so it's not accessible outside of scope of this file. And I'm going to say that this extends a state of type login page. And this is the basic workflow when it comes to working with stateful widget. A stateful widget always has a class that extends the stateful widget, and then a corresponding state class that basically manages the state for the widget. So in this case, the login page is the actual widget that extends the stateful widget. And then to manage the state of our login page, we use the underscore login page state class. And then basically within the actual login page state class, I need to create the build function. Here, we're basically going to be defining how our widget looks. So for now, what I'll do is that within here, I'm going to say that I'm going to return a scaffold. So it's an empty canvas for us to draw stuff on. That's what a scaffold is. And we use scaffolds usually when we want to define a new page within our application. So now that this is done, within the create state function, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be removing the throw unimplemented error. Instead of this, I'll say that I'm going to return a instance of our login page state like so, and do command save. And now all of the errors on my login page class should be fixed. So let's go back to main.dart and let's set the home property for the material app to be our actual login page like so. Press enter, do command save, and as you can see at the top, it imports the login page class. So now that this is done, you can see that it's letting me know that the constructor that's being called is not a const constructor, so let's remove it. I can also see that in my test folder, it's giving me an error for the widget test. So for now, what we can do is just delete the test folder because we're not going to be implementing any tests within our project. So let's just delete that. And now we're actually ready to test our application. So to test my application, what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to make sure that I have some type of a main.dart file open. And then from there, what I'm going to be doing is actually opening up an actual simulator. So let's talk about how you can open up simulators. I'm assuming that for your Flutter development environment, you've actually already set up emulators, and within the actual VS Code that I'm running, you also installed the extension for Flutter, which I can show you which one it is. But if you follow the tutorials that I linked to at the start of this tutorial, which were the ones where I showcased you guys how to set up Flutter on Mac OS and Windows, then you should already have it. But basically, if you don't, then you need to install the Flutter extension inside of Visual Studio Code, and then open a main.dart file, and then you can click on the button at the very bottom where it says Mac OS. It might say something else for you, and it's going to pop up an actual list of all of the simulators that are available to you to actually test your application or run your application on. In my case, I'm going to do start Pixel 7, and this is going to spin up a emulator for me on which I can test my application. At the bottom, as you can see, it's telling me that it's waiting for the Pixel 7 API 34 to connect. And once this actual simulator launches correctly, you can see that now at the bottom, the actual name of the target where we're going to be running our application on changes to Pixel 7. So this means that I've selected Pixel 7 to be the actual target where I run my application. Then what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be coming to the top, saying run, and then doing start debugging. You can also do F5 on the keyboard, and that should do the same thing. So let's do start debugging, and this is going to start running my application. You can also use the actual button here with a bug and then a play button to actually debug your application. And as you can see, it's telling me that it's basically going to launch this application onto the simulator. So now what we need to do is basically wait for the actual build process to complete. So as you can see, it lets me know that now it built the actual application, and it has basically deployed that onto my actual simulator, and I can work with it. So to just quickly test out that the hot reload functionality, and I'll come back to what hot reloaded works, what we can do is come to login_page. And within the login page, I'm going to come to the login page states build function to the scaffold. And here what I'm going to do is set the background color to be colors dot, and I'm going to do green. If I do command save, you're going to see that automatically the changes that we've applied to the code are going to be reflected on the actual simulator. And this is how we know that the hot reload function is working. And then besides this, I'll also check the actual restart function is working by just clicking on this. And this is going to completely restart my application, completely start it again. And this is useful sometimes when we get exceptions or we get some kind of an error within our application where hot reload might not fix it. So we might want to restart our application completely and get rid of all of the existing state and everything like that. So for that, we can use restart. But now everything looks good. So we can actually get started with designing our login page. So before we actually design a login page, we can actually take a look at how our login page looks. So at the very top of our login page, we have some kind of a text that says login. Then we have a title that says receive book, which is the name of our app. We have two text fields that basically allow us to put some information within them, which pertains to the username and the password. Talk about them. And then finally, we have a button. So a whole bunch of different things that we need to implement on this login page. So let's talk how we can do this. So to get started, the first thing that I'm going to be doing is actually implementing the title at the top. So how do we do that? Well, to do this, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to come to my login page states build function to my scaffold. And on my scaffold, I'm basically going to define the app bar property. So this is the app bar, which if I create an instance of this, you're going to see is going to display at the very top. And for now, it's not showing us anything. But this app bar basically refers to the top bar that you see in many applications that basically shows sometimes the information regarding the actual page that you're on and maybe a button to open the drawer or thing like that. So in our case, what our actual app bar refers to is this top part of our actual UI, where we are showcasing the title of our application. On the actual home page, as you can see, on the recipe detail page, as you can see, the app bar gives us a button to go back. And then also on the login page where it shows us the login title. So to add a title to my app bar widget, what I'm going to be doing is defining the title property. And as you can see, it expects a widget. To display text on the actual screen for our Flutter application, we use a widget called text. And then we pass it a string, which defines the actual text that we want to show. In our case, it's going to be login. And there we have it. It's showcasing the actual login text within our app bar at the top. Now, if I want to center this, what I can do is that I can actually add a property to my app bar called center title and set that to true. And this will put login in the middle. And this is practically all we had to do. And the reason for that is because the styling for this text comes from the actual theme data that we had defined, where we had defined the app bar theme and specifically the actual text style that needs to be applied to the title. That is for this actual app bar. So you can kind of see how things are kind of linking together now. And hopefully it's making sense to you. But if you're still confused, just keep going and things will slowly start making sense to you. So now the next thing that I want to talk about is all of the other stuff that we see on our login page, which is basically the title, the text fields, and then the buttons. How do we add these? Well, on our scaffold, we have another property, which is called body. And body basically expects us to pass it a widget, which basically defines how the body for the scaffold looks, how the body of the page looks. What I want to do in the spirit of actually keeping my code organized is actually create a function called build UI and then basically set the return from that function to be the body. Then within my login page state class, I'm going to say that I'm going to create a function which will return a widget. It's going to be called the build UI. And then what I'm going to be doing is opening up the function definition. And for now, I'm going to say that we are going to return something. And what are we going to be returning? Well, if I take a look at my UI closely, I can see that I have UI elements that are basically stacked in a vertical manner. There's a title, below which I have text fields, below which I have a button. So to achieve this kind of a functionality within Flutter, we have a widget that's called a column widget, which basically allows us to embed widgets within this and then organize them in a vertical manner. So this is why we use a column. So I'm going to add a column widget, and then the column widget expects a list of children, which basically are the actual widgets that are going to reside within this column. So for now, the first thing that I want is the title. So let's create that. So then again, what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be creating another function. I'm going to say that this function will return a widget. It's going to be called underscore title. I'm going to open the function definition up. And by now you guys might know that when we want to display text, we use the text widget. And then we pass a string to it, which basically defines the actual text we want to display on screen. So in this case, it's going to be receive book, like so. And then I'm going to take this title. I'm going to come back to my column, to the children's list. I'm going to add the title here and then add the parentheses to invoke the function and do command save. And now if I come back to my application, you can see that we are seeing a very teeny tiny text that says receive book. So let's fix the styling for this. So I want to make this text a bit bigger and other things like that. So for that, on my text, I have a style property that basically defines how our text is styled. This needs to be of type text style. So I'm going to initialize a new instance of text style. And here I'm going to pass the font size. And the font size here is going to be 35. And as soon as I do this and do command save, using the power of hot reload, it's automatically going to reflect this change. And now the size is much bigger. I also want to make the font less thick. So I'm going to define the font weight property and I'm going to set that to font weight. And then I'm going to do .w300 and do command save. And since this widget is not going to change, I'm going to add the const keyword before it just to improve performance. So now that this is done, the next thing that I want to do is actually center this actual title. So to achieve this, what I'm going to be doing is coming to my column. And here I'm going to define firstly the main axis size for my column. So since a column aligns its children in a vertical manner, then the main axis of the column is the vertical axis. And we're also going to be talking about something called the cross axis. And the cross axis in this case for a column is going to be the horizontal axis. So on the main axis, I want my column to take as much space as it can. And then I'm going to define the main axis alignment. So the main axis alignment basically refers to how are the children basically aligned within the column in the main axis, or on the main axis, I should say. And in this case, that's the vertical axis because we're using a column. So there are different alignment options we can use. For now, what I'm going to do is set the alignment option to be space evenly, and then we'll talk about the other ones later on. Or let's actually set this to start. So I want stuff to be aligned from the start of our actual column. And then finally, I'm going to define the cross-axis alignment. So how are elements aligned to each other on the horizontal axis? So I want the elements to be in the center of the actual column. So for that, I'll do cross-axis alignment dot center and do command save. And that's pretty much all we had to do. Nothing's going to change for now, but just keep on going with me and you'll soon see what's going to happen. So now that this is done, let's actually move on to the next step, which is to actually showcase these text fields. So how do we do that? Well, to do this, what we're going to be doing is actually creating a new function. And I'm going to call this function _login form. Open it up. And then within this, I'm going to say that we are going to be returning a widget called a sized box. And I'll let you guys know what a sized box is later on. But for now, let's come back to our actual column. And then I'm going to say that after my title, I'm going to show the login form and do command save. A sized box is basically a widget that we use that can have a child within it. And it's basically used to restrict the size of the child that it contains to specific dimensions that we tell it. In my case, what I want to do is that I want to say that whatever child is going to be within the size box, its width is going to be the following. And since I want my actual application to be responsive, I'm going to be basically taking into account the actual width of our device. So to access the width of our device, there are multiple ways you can do this in Flutter, but one easy way to do this is by using media query. So I'm going to do media query.sizeOf context.width, and then I'm going to multiply this with 0.90 like so and do command save. Then I'm going to define the height for my sized box. And I'm going to do the same thing where media query.sizeOf context. And then I'm going to do .height. And I want this to be 30% the height of the screen. So this sized box is going to have the width, which is going to be equal to 90% of the width of our screen. And the height is going to be 30% the height of our actual screen. Then the child for this is going to be, for now, a text form field. Like so, and I'll do command save, and you're going to see that now an actual text field is going to appear on our actual screen, which we can interact with and put data into. For now, nothing's happening with this actual text field. We're not managing anything within this, and this is basically a widget that we can use to actually take input from the user. So now that we have this text form field, what I'm going to be doing is removing it, and the reason we're removing this is because if I come back to the actual design for my application, you can see that I have two distinct text fields. And these text fields basically are used to capture the username and the password from the user. And they have some additional functionality that's attached to them, such as validating that the user inputs a username and password and some other things like that. So what I want to do before I actually add a text form field to my actual widget tree is to actually add a form widget to my actual widget tree. So to my size box, I'm going to add a form widget. And a form widget is basically going to allow us to perform different operations on our text form field, manage the state of our text form fields, and a bunch of other things, and make it easy for us to actually extract information from our text form fields when we want. So that's why we're using a form widget. Form widgets are usually used in tandem with text form field widgets to implement the functionality of actually gathering data from the user within a form. So now that I have this form widget defined, for the child of this, I'm going to be using a column. And the reason for that is because within my form, I'm going to have two children. I'm going to have a text form field for the username and then a text form field for the actual password. So for this, what I'm going to be doing is actually using a column. So the form is going to have a column. The column will have some children, and that for now is going to be an empty list, and I'll do command save. Then within this column's children, I'm going to add a text form field like so, and then I'll do command save. And there we have it. Now we're displaying this text form field. So now that this is done, what I want to do is that I want to center this text form field within our column. So I'm going to quickly do that. And the way I'm going to be doing this is by firstly defining the main axis size for my column to be main axis size.max. The main axis alignment, we can do main axis alignment.space evenly. So I want the elements within this column to be spaced evenly. And then the cross axis alignment, you might have guessed it, is going to be cross-axis alignment.center, because I want to horizontally center all of the children within this column. And to do that, we have to set the cross-axis alignment, which refers to the horizontal axis, to be cross-axis alignment.center. Do Command Save. It's still not going to work. Just bear with me, and it's going to happen once we add another text form field. But for now, let's just keep chugging along. So now what I want to do is that I want to basically add a hint text here, which basically tells the user what the actual input here needs to be. So for that, what I'm going to do is come to my text form field widget, and here I'm going to define the decoration property, and that is going to be of type input decoration. So as the name suggests, the decoration property basically defines the styling for our text form field. And here I'm going to set the hint text to be username, like so, and do Command Save, and there we go. We now have a hint text that's appearing on our actual text form field, and as soon as we click on our text form field, the keyboard appears, and when we enter our information, then that information is displayed and the actual hint text disappears. But once we don't have any information, the hint text reappears. So this is what a hint text is, and I'll do Command Save. Now that this is done, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be basically taking this text form field, copying it and pasting it again within the same column. And this text field is going to be responsible for the password, and then I'm going to do Command Save. So now that this is done, what I want to do is actually add some spacing between the actual title and then this form that we're seeing. So how do I do that? Well, to do this, I'll come to the very top where I've defined my build UI function and the main column that consists of the title and the login form. And here I'm going to set the main axis alignment, instead of being .start, to be, let's just say for now, space evenly. And this way, what I'm telling the actual column is that, hey, I want the children that are within you to be spaced evenly within the column on the main axis, which is the vertical axis. So now that this is done, we have a place to put our username in, we have a place to put our password in. The last thing that I want to do is actually implement the actual displaying of our actual login button, and then we can actually move towards implementing the actual login functionality, or the logic, I should say, once we have the UI kind of completed. So to do that, what I'll do is that I will create a new function now, and I'll say that this function will return a widget. It's going to be called _login button. And similar to how an underscore in front of class names tells the actual code that this class is going to be a private class, a underscore before function name also tells the actual compiler that these functions are going to be private. So I'm going to do a login button, open the function body up, and here I'm going to say that I'm going to return a sized box widget, like so. Then I'm going to take this login button and I'm going to add this within the column where I have my text form fields after both of the text form fields, like so, and do Command Save. Then now, since we understand how to define the width for our sized box, I'm just going to quickly and copy paste this code in where we are setting the width to be 60% the width of the screen, and then I'm going to set the child to be a button. The button that I'm going to be using is going to be specifically called an elevated button. And then before we can do anything, we need to define two parameters on the elevated button. One is what happens when we click on this button. So this is a callback function. For now, I'll just define this to be an empty function. So you can define two parentheses first and then curly brackets. And this is called an anonymous function. And then the child here is going to be basically what's shown within this button. So I want to show some text that says login. So I'm going to do const the text widget. And then I'm going to say that's going to say login and do Command Save. And there we have it. That's pretty much all we had to do. So now the last thing we are going to be doing before we can actually call our UI done and then actually move towards the implementation of the logic for logging in is actually taking a look at a safe area widget. And a safe area widget is an essential component within our actual Flutter application that we might use, we might not use, depends on our use cases, which allows us to ensure that the content of our app remains visible and accessible on our screen, even when the device has notches, status bar, or other intrusions. So let's just say that you are going to be creating an application that's going to run on the latest iPhones, which have these dynamic islands within them. And then it's also going to run on a Pixel, which is going to have this camera that's going to be built within the screen. I don't want my UI to be obstructed by these cameras or by these notches or by these dynamic islands that are on all of these devices. So to avoid this problem, what I can do is that I can wrap my actual widget within a safe area widget, and then it's automatically going to make sure that my app content remains visible and accessible on the screen, even if the device has notches or anything like that. So to do this, what I'll do is that I'll come to my build UI function, and then you can either right click on it and then basically say that I want to refactor this, and then you can wrap this with a widget. And a shortcut to this on the keyboard is also Command-Shift-R on Mac. I do not remember specifically what's it on Windows, but you can wrap this with a widget. And this is basically going to wrap this build UI function within a new widget. And the widget here is going to be a safe area widget. And finally, once I've wrapped everything within a safe area, I am basically going to fix this alignment error here where all of the things are not in the center. So for that, what I've concluded through my debugging, and as you get more experience with Flutter, you'll be able to debug these kind of issues, is that my column is not extending to the complete width of my screen. So to fix this, what I'm going to be doing is coming to my column within my build UI, and I'm going to be basically doing the same thing where I'm going to be wrapping this with a widget. In this case, I'm going to be wrapping this with a size box. And then for my size box, I am basically going to say that the width for this is going to be media query.size of context.width, so the complete width of our device. To command save, and there we go. With that, we pretty much fixed all of these styling issues. So now our application looks exactly how it looks in the screenshots, and what's left is to actually implement the logic for logging in. So before I do that, what I'm going to do is come back to the main.dart file, and here I'm going to show you guys that if you want to basically remove this actual banner that shows debug here from your Flutter application, you can basically set the property debug show checked banner to false, and this is basically going to remove the banner from here. If you set this to true, then it'll show the banner. So that's pretty much it. So now that we have the UI for our login page completed and we have a basic understanding of how to build UIs in Flutter, let's actually move our focus towards implementing some business logic. Let's talk about how our authentication flow is going to work, or how we're going to log in the user into our application. So to get started, the first thing that I'd like to bring your attention to is the actual API that we're going to be using throughout this video to actually access information from regarding recipes, but also authenticate with. More specifically, we're going to be sending our authentication request to dummyjson.com/auth/login. And this is an excellent resource, I should say, before we continue. That's dummyjson.com, because here you can get access to a lot of different APIs that you can work with to improve your skills as a developer. You can use these APIs to build demo web applications, demo mobile apps, or other applications that you imagine. And all of this is given to us for free. So a huge shout out to dummyjson.com. It's an excellent site that I recommend to a lot of beginner developers that want to learn how to work with REST APIs. So to implement the login functionality, the flow is going to be something like this. We're going to send a request to https://dummyjson.com/auth/login. And we're going to more specifically send a post request. And in the body of our request, we're going to include the username and the password that the user gives us from these fields. And then in response, if authentication request is successful, we should get a response back where more specifically, we are just going to be focusing on the token. This token is basically going to be a JWT token or JSON Web Token, which we're then going to be attaching to all subsequent requests that we send to the server to tell the server that this request is coming from us, the authenticated user that had provided in the previous step the username and password. And this is just an industry practice of how JWT token works. There's nothing special here that pertains to Flutter. This is how JWT authentication works. So now that we have a good understanding of this, let's go back to our code. So within my code right now, what I'm going to be doing is closing the main.dart file, coming back to the login page, and let's do firstly the implementation of our form. Let's make sure that our form is working the way we want it to work, and then we'll move on to actually extracting the information from the form and then sending it over to the server or authenticating ourselves. So to work with the form, as I'd alluded to before, when we were building the form, is that when we want to work with forms within Flutter, we need to wrap our widgets with a form widget. And if you hover over the form widget, it tells you that it creates a container for form fields. So basically a form widget is required if you want to work with form field widgets. So there are text form fields, but there are other type of form field widgets that are available to you. As you can see, there's form field, there's text form field, there's Cupertino text form field row, and a whole bunch of other things such as drop-down button form fields, input date picker form fields. So different input fields that you can use to build your form. In our case, we are just using two text form fields. So now that we have a basic understanding of how to create a form, let's actually talk about what we need to do to make this form functional. Well, every form requires something that is known as a key, and this key basically allows us to work with the form. And this key also maintains the state of the form. So let's create a key for our form. So to create a key for my form, what I'm going to be doing is coming to the very top of my class, which is the login page state class. And here I'm going to be creating a variable of type global key, and specifically it's going to be form state. And then I'm going to say that this variable is going to call underscore form key. And then I'm going to be setting this equal to a new instance of global key like so, and do command save. Then I'll take this login form key. I will come down to where I have my form, and I'm going to set the key property to be the login form field. So now with the login form fee attached to our form, I can use this to actually manipulate the form and work with it. So let's actually take a look at it, how we can do this. So what now I'm going to be doing is actually coming to the login button. And what I'm going to be doing here is basically implementing the functionality of what happens when we click on login so that we validate our form. So what I'm going to do now is come to login button, go to the onPressed callback function. And here, the first thing that I want to do when the user clicks login is make sure that there's something in the form. Well, to do this, the first thing that I'm going to be doing is using an if statement where I'm going to say if, and then I'm going to do login form key dot current state. So access the current state of the login form. And then we're going to call validate like so. And validate is going to return to us a Boolean value. And if you hover over the error that you're seeing, it says us that the method validate can't be unconditionally invoked because the receiver can be null. And the reason it's giving us this error because it's telling us that current state can have a value, cannot have a value. As you can see, it's giving us a generic type here and saying that this is an optional variable, means that current state might have a value, might not have a value. So what we can do to actually get rid of this error is use a null aware access operator by just tacking on a question mark before validate. So what's this basically going to do is that it's going to say that, hey, if current state exists, then call the validate function on this. But now it's going to give us another error saying that a nullable expression can't be used as a condition. And the reason for this is because this actual condition now, or expression I should say, is going to most probably return null if the state doesn't exist, or it might return a value. But this always needs to return some kind of a value for the if statement to work. So what I'm going to be doing here is then again using a null aware operator, and I'm going to say like so false. So what this is basically saying is that if the validate function returns a null value, then we're just going to use false. Otherwise, we just use the value that gets returned by the validate function. So that's pretty much all we have to do. So with this, we can do command save, and we can just leave this, and we can come back to our actual app and click on login. And as we can see, nothing's happening. And the reason for that is because even though now we are calling the validate function on our form's key, and we've attached our key to our form, we haven't implemented the actual validation logic that needs to run when we call validate. So this validation logic needs to be implemented for each of the fields. So in this case, I need to implement some validation logic for the username and then some validation logic for the password. So to implement the validation logic on our text form field or any form field, we have a validator function callback where basically we are given a value, and then this function determines if the value that's provided to us, and this value comes from the actual inputted stuff that the user inputs within the text form field, is the value valid or not. So here we can perform any type of validation that I'd like to do. So in my case, the actual validation I want to do is make sure that the value is not null. So I'm going to do if the value is equals to null or the value is empty, then what we do is that we return a string which says enter a username like so. Otherwise, we do not return anything, as you can see. So what this basically means, and as you can see, what the validator function expects from us is an optional string. If the actual return value from our validator function returns an actual value, this means that the validation has failed. And if we do not return anything, that means that the actual validation has passed. So in our case, if the value is null or the value is empty, then our validation fails because we return enter username, otherwise it doesn't. So now with this done, I'll take this, I'll copy this if statement, I'll come to the actual text form field, I'll create the validator function callback here as well. And then I'm going to add the same if clause within this, but instead of doing value.isEmpty, I'm going to say if the value's length is less than 5, then we say enter a valid password, like so, and do command save. So with this done, now we've successfully implemented the validation logic as well. So if I go back to my application and press login, you're going to see that now when we press login, we call the validate function our forms key, which is attached to this form. And since these text form field widgets are children for this form automatically calls the validator functions on all of these form fields. And this form is only going to be valid when all of the validator functions for all of the form fields that we include within this form actually do not return a value and have valid values within them. So if I add a username, let's just say like so, and I press login, you're going to see that now the username error is removed, but we need to enter a password as well. So let's enter a password 12345, press login, and you can see that the errors are gone. One thing that I'd like to quickly mention here is that for my password field, I'd like to make sure that I obscure the text. So how can we do this? Well, for the password field, what I can do is actually on the text form field, there's a property called obscure text, and I'm going to set this to true and do command save, and this will basically obscure the text and we won't be able to see it anymore. So now that the validation is working, we can move on to the next step, which is to actually save the information from these fields into a variable that we can then use later to actually send our request. Well, the logic is going to be pretty similar to how we did for validate. If we made sure that our form was valid, then what we can do is actually on my login form, I can go to the current state, and on that, I can optionally call the save function and do command save. So now if the form is valid and we press on login, it's going to call this function as well. And what save is basically going to do is that, again, for the form, on every text form field, or any form field, I should say, we have a function called onSaved. And this gets called when we call that save function on the key. And here we are given a value, and this is the value that's within the form field when the actual save function is called. So here what I want to do is basically save this value now within an actual variable. So firstly, we need to create a variable then. So let's go to the top of my login page state class. And here what I'm going to be doing is now creating a string variable. And I'm going to say this is going to be an optional string variable. And the reason for that is because we might have a username, we might have no username given to us. So like so. So the username might be null or it might have a value, same for password. Then I'll come down to where I have my login form, back to the onSaved function. And here what I'm going to do is basically say that I'm going to set the username that we've actually created to the value that gets passed in and do command save. But if I just do this and click on login, even though everything looks to work the way it's supposed to work, this is actually not going to work. And the reason for that is because when we are working with stateful widgets, as you can see, there's a certain thing that we have to do in order to update the actual state that's within our stateful widget. So in this case, this username and password are part of the state of our login page. So to update them, we can't simply just do username equals to value. What we need to do is actually wrap this within a set state call. And then within this, we can actually say that username is equals to value. So what set state is basically going to do in a nutshell is that it's going to take the value, it's going to put that into the username, but then it's also going to render a rebuild of the widget tree, or more specifically, just the widget tree of this actual login page. And this way, the value will then be actually persisted and actually the changes will be displayed on the screen as well. So always remember when working with stateful widgets that you need to call set state before you update the state for that corresponding stateful widget. So let's copy this onSaved function and let's go back to the other text form field. And before the validator function, let's do the same, but this time instead of setting it to the username, let's set it to the password and do command save. And there we have it. That's pretty much done. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to come down And after my on pressed, I'm going to basically do print. And within the string, I'm going to interpolate the value, username and password. So to interpolate values within strings, we use a $sign. Following that, we can use the variable name. So username, and then I'm going to do a space, dash, and then I'm going to do password. Let's do command save. Let's open up the debug console. So to open it up, you can go and click on terminal, new terminal, and then basically click on additional views and go to debug console. And let's see what happens. So let's restart our application. And as you can see, it's letting me know that the app has restarted. If I click on login, nothing's going to be printed. And you can see that it tells me to enter a username and a password. So let's copy this username that we're going to be sending and pasting it in. And then I'm also going to do the password, come back and paste it in. Done. And if I click on login, this time you can see that the validation logic passed. And in our debug console, we can see that the value for the username was printed, following by a space, a dash, and then the actual password. So now we are not only validating the form correctly, but we're also saving the information that's within the form into variables that now we can use to actually authenticate ourselves. So I'm going to remove this print statement for now, and we can do command save, and that's pretty much it. The last thing that I'd like to do is that for this application only, what I want to do is that we are right now testing our application and testing the login functionality, is that I want to give a initial value to my text form field so it's easy for me to log in quickly without having to input the username and password all the time. So to do this, what I'll do is that I'll firstly come to my actual text form field for my username, and here I'm going to set the initial value to be the username, which dummy JSON provides us as a valid username. And then the password, I'm going to come back, and for my other form field, which is the password one, I'm going to set the initial value to be the password and do command save. So now with this, if I restart my application, by default, our text form fields are going to have initial values, which are going to correspond to the valid username and valid email. Now that we have our form working, and we have the information from our form being saved within variables, the next logical step is to use this information to actually perform the login operation. So how are we going to be doing this? Well, to do this, the first thing that we need to do is actually send requests over the network. And to achieve this, we're going to be using the first package that I'm going to be introducing to you within this course, and we're only going to be using 2. And the reason I'm keeping the packages to a minimum is to, 1, make you guys use only the bare bones stuff that comes with Flutter, so you get a good understanding of it, and not to confuse you guys too much with all of the packages that we're going to be using. But at the same time, I want to give you a feel for what it feels like to use packages. So I'm going to be showing you a very useful package, which is called Dio, which is a very powerful HTTP network package for Dart and Flutter. And this is the actual package that I use within all of the projects that I build using Flutter. And this is a package that I highly recommend. And as you can see, with 6,000 or so likes, that this package is very popular. So to use packages, what we do is that we basically can find the different packages that we can implement or add to our Flutter project on a website called pub.dev. So as you can see, if you come to the website, it says that it's the official package repository for Dart and Flutter apps. So here you can see a lot of different packages that other talented developers have created that you can implement within your Flutter application to add different kinds of functionality to it, such as audio, Firebase Crashlytics, video players, and things like that. So to add an actual package, what we do is that we navigate to that packages page, and then we basically come to where it says the title for the package, and we click on this clipboard button. Then we come back. We come to our pubspec.yaml file, and the pubspec.yaml file is basically a configuration file for our Flutter project that defines some of the settings that our Flutter project has. So it defines what the version of our Flutter project right now is, the environment, so the SDK version, the dependencies, the external dependencies that our application has, the dev dependencies, and a whole bunch of other things such as the assets we might be using and other things like that. So to specifically add dependencies, what we do is that we come to the dependencies section, and then underneath of this Flutter tag, we add our dependencies here by just adding them on a new line and then doing command save. Since I have the Flutter extension installed, it's automatically going to understand that a change happened within my pubspec.yaml file, analyze it, see that I've added a new package, and then automatically call Flutter pub-get, which is going to go and grab this package's code and put that within my own Flutter project. If for some reason this doesn't happen for you, then what you can do is open up the terminal. And then once you've opened up the terminal, the next thing that you can do is make sure that you're within the folder that's the root of your Flutter project. Like so. As you can see, this is the root of my Flutter project. And here you can call the command flutter pub-get, and this will do the same thing. Again, if you follow the steps that are outlined in my setup instructions for how to set up Flutter on macOS and Windows, then you shouldn't have to do this, but this is what you can do if you want to then actually add the packages code within your own Flutter project. So now with this done, what I'll recommend is that you stop debugging your application and you give it a run again to make sure that this time the code for the actual package is also included with your actual Flutter code when it's actually launched on the device. So I'm going to now minimize the browser and we can come back to how to send this network request. So to send our network request, what I'm going to be doing is that in the spirit of keeping my code easily understandable and maintainable, I'm going to be breaking it up into different parts. I want to create a new folder, which I'm going to call services. And as the name alludes to, this folder is going to hold the different services that we are going to be using within our application. And then within the services folder, I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call this auth_service.dart. So as you can see, this file is going to contain a class which is going to be called authService, and this class is basically going to assist us in performing authentication related activities. So let's get going. So firstly, I'll just create a class. This is going to be a simple Dart class. I'm going to call this authService. So the next thing I want to do now is make sure that during the lifecycle of my Flutter application that there only ever exists one single instance of our authService class, and this is called the singleton pattern. Now there are other ways you can do this, such as using service locator packages such as Get-It, but that's too complicated. What we're going to be doing is using the bare minimum things. So what we're going to be doing is using just pure Dart code to create functionality within our class that limits it to just being a singleton class. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing that I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be adding a static variable to my authService class. It's going to be final. It's going to be of type authService. It's going to be called _singleton, like so. And I'm going to set this equal to something. What am I going to set this equal to? Well, I'm going to set this equal to a call to a factory function. So I'm going to define factory function by typing in factory. I'm going to call this authService, like so. Nothing within the parentheses, and then I'm going to say that we are going to return _singleton, like so. So when the constructor for the authService class is called, it's going to return the singleton instance on the class. And then I'm going to set the singleton to authService dot, and then I'm going to do _internal, like so. And then to fix this error, all I'm going to be doing is actually coming down and saying that we are going to have a constructor which is going to be the following, and do command save. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this done, this class is only going to ever have a single instance of it available to us to use during the lifecycle of our application, and we won't be able to create multiple instances of our auth service. So the last thing I'm going to be doing now is that I'm going to be creating a function on my auth service, and I'm going to say that this function will return a future bool. So this function is going to take some time to complete, and once it completes, it's going to return a Boolean value to us. It's going to be called login. It's going to take in two parameters. One is going to be string username, and the other is going to be string password, like so. And for now, the body of this is going to be empty. The only thing I'll do is mark this function as async, and then for now, what I'll do is return false to fix all of the errors. Then what we'll do is actually go back to our login page. And here what I'm going to be doing is coming back to our login button. And after we've made sure that our form is valid and we've saved it, the next thing I'm going to be doing is creating a variable called bool type result and setting it equal to auth service, which we're going to import from our services folder. and then I'm going to do dot, and I'm going to call the login function like so. And here we're going to be passing the username and password, and that's pretty much it. The only thing that now we have to make sure is that it tells me that a value of type future bool, which is the value that this login function returns, can't be assigned to a variable that expects a Boolean value. So to fix this, I'll say that this function is going to be asynchronous, and then I'm going to await. So what await's basically going to do is that it's going to wait for this actual function call to complete, and then take the output and put that within result. And then to fix these errors with the username and the password, you can add exclamation marks after the username and the password, letting the actual Dart compiler know that you know for sure that even though username and password are optional string type variables, that they for sure are going to have a value. And the reason we can do this with certainty is because we're already making sure with our own logic that username and password are never null. So let's do this. Let's go back to our auth service, and then let's print username password to the console, and let's just print username, open up the terminal, go to the debug console, and then restart my application. And then if I click on login, you can see that it's printing the username. So now that we are correctly calling the login function, the next thing that we need to do is actually send a request to the specific endpoint. How can we do this? What I'm going to be doing is creating a new service within my services folder called http_service. So as the name alludes to, this service is going to allow us to send HTTP requests. And then what I'm going to do is basically come to my auth service, copy all of this stuff, come back to my HTTP service, paste it, and then I'm just going to say that I'm going to rename the symbol, and instead of this being auth service, what I'm going to do is say this is going to be HTTP service class, like so. And then what I'm going to be doing is basically removing the login function from the HTTP service class. And the reason I did this was to, one, save time, and two, that I also want just a single instance of the HTTP service available to my application during the lifecycle of it. So within here, what I'm going to be doing is actually firstly setting up the DO object so that we can use it to actually send HTTP requests. I'm going to create a function which will return a future void. I'm going to say it's going to be called setup. And the setup function will optionally take a named parameter, which is going to be called bearer token. So this is an optional argument, which is a named argument that might get passed to the setup function, but it's not required. And then I'm going to mark my function as async and open up its body and do command save. The next thing that I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be coming to my HTTP services internal constructor. And here I'm going to say that when the HTTP service gets constructed, I want to call the setup function like so. And the last thing that I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be adding a variable to my HTTP service class called _do. And I'm going to set this to a new instance of do like so, and do command save. So now with this done, let's actually go to our dummyjson.com/doc/auth page, and let's see what type of information we need to send. So we need to send a post request to /auth/login with the following headers and the following body to be able to successfully authenticate ourselves with the API. So I need to set the specific headers within my request for this to work correctly. So how will I do that? Well, firstly, I'll again come back to my HTTP service class, and when setup gets called, what I'm going to be doing is creating a variable within this called headers, and I'm going to set this equal to a map. Here I'm going to say that the only header that we're going to be setting is going to be content type, like so, and I'm going to set that to application/JSON. So this is what the actual API instructed us to do, or the docs, I should say, instructed us to do. Once this is done, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is telling DO that, hey, you need to use these headers. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to create a final variable. I'm going to call this options, and I'm going to set this equal to a new instance of base options. And then what I'm going to be doing here is that I'm going to set the headers to headers, like so, and do command save. So this is basically going to, for these options, set the headers to be the headers that we've specified. And the final thing that I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to access the DO variable, and I'm going to say that the options are going to be equal to the options that we have just defined, and do command save. And there we have it. Now we've instructed DO these headers when sending a request. The next thing that I want to do is also on my base options actually define the base URL for my API. So how can I do that? Well, within my lib folder, and this is just for the sake of making my code be as maintainable as possible, I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call this const.dart. And within const.dart, I'm going to create a variable which is going to be a constant. It's going to be called API underscore base underscore URL. It's going to be set to https://dummyjson.com/. So the base URL to access our API up till here. And then all of the other endpoints can be tagged to it to go to specific resources within my API. And then what I'm going to do is just make sure that I save this, come back to my HTTP service, go to the base URL and set this equal to that variable that I just defined called API base URL that we are going to get from the const file. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now one last thing that I'd like to do is make sure that on validate status, and you can just paste this in what I'm writing here, but make sure that I tell DO that if the status is null, then what I want to do is return false. Otherwise, we return status less than 500. So this is something that you should just do for now. Do not need to worry about what this is actually doing. This is something to do with HTTP status codes and making sure that DO doesn't throw actual exceptions when it gets status codes that are less than 500. But for now, just leave it. Don't confuse yourself. Just put this here. And this is going to save you a lot of hassle when the API sends you response codes that are not 200 response codes. So with this done, that's pretty much it. So we've now defined our options and we've told DO that, hey, you're going to use these options with every request that you send. So now we're all good to go. So let's give a restart to our application to make sure that nothing's broken and we can move onwards to the next step. So the next step is that I want to create a function that can help us to send post requests to a specific endpoint for our API. So how do I do that? Well, what I'm going to be doing is creating a function within my HTTP service. I'm going to say that this function will return a future response. And we might get a response, we might not, so I'll say that this is going to be optional. I'll call this function post, and I'll say that we require two things. We require a path to where we want to send the post request to, as well as the data that we want to send along our post request. Then I'm going to say that this is going to be async, open up the function's body, add a try catch block, and within the actual catch block, I'm just going to say that print error, like so. Then within the try block, I'm going to do final response equals to, and I'm going to do await underscore DO. And then on this, we can call a function called post. And it requires us to pass it a path, which we're already doing. But besides this, for the data property, I'm going to say that we're going to send the data that gets passed to us within this function and do command save. Then that's pretty much all we had to do. So now I can come back to my auth service and I can actually use the HTTP service here. So I'm going to come to the top of my auth service. And here I'm going to say that I'm going to create a variable final HTTP service. And I'm going to set this equal to HTTP service like so and do command save. Then within the login, what I'm going to be doing is that instead of returning false, I'm going to remove everything that's here. And I'm going to add a try catch block. And within catch, what we are going to do is just print error. And if we reach the very end of this function, I'm just going to return false because we weren't able to log in. And within try, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to say that we're going to create a variable response, and I'm going to set it equal to await underscore HTTP service, and we'll call the post function on it. Then we have to give it the path. You can see that here it tells me that I basically need to send a request to auth/login. So let's copy that, come back and paste it in here for the path. And then what's the data? Well, the data needs to be username and password. So I'm going to say that we are going to set the username key within our map to username, and then the password key within our actual map to password like so. And then once this is done, that's pretty much all we had to do. So for now, what we can do is actually print the response dot status code to our console. And you can see that it tells me that it can't be unconditionally accessed, so we can add an elevator operator, and there we have it. We're all good to go. So now with this done, let's come back to our login page and let's see that, okay, we are calling authservice.login. Everything seems to be looking great. So the last thing that I'll do is that I will come to where it says login after the response and make sure that I've print. So we are now ready to test. So I'll come and I will click on login. And you can see that after some time we get null printed to the actual console. So why is that? Well, the reason for that is because in our HTTP service, I made a silly mistake where once we actually send the request, we are not returning the response. So let's return the response, do command save, and come back, restart our application. And now if I click on login, you're going to see that it returns 200 to us. So a 200 status code means that our request was successful. So we can continue onwards implementing the logic for what happens when the request is successful. So what I want to do is that once we get a response back, I want to make sure that the response's status code is 200, like so, and our response data is not null. Then I'll open up the body for this if clause, and here what I'm going to do is print response.data, and that's pretty much it. And I can add a nullivare access operator here as well. Do command save, and then we can restart our application and press login. You can see that after some time it prints a bunch of information to us, which includes the ID, username. So this all relates to this information that gets returned to us when a successful request is sent. So now what I want to do is that I want to take this JSON that gets given to us and convert that into an actual class, or a user class, I should say, so that I can use that within my application. So to convert the JSON that we get from response.data into an actual Dart object, what I can do is actually come to a website that's called quickttype.io. And let me increase the size for this. And you can basically open QuickType. Once you do this, what you can do is give your class a name. In my case, I'm going to give my class a name of user. I'm going to say that the source type will be JSON. And then what you can do is come back to the dummyjson.com's documentation, copy this response, come back, paste it in here like so, and that's pretty much all you had to do. And with this done, you can see that it automatically creates Dart code for us for what the user class should look like. But what I'd like to do is also add some actual functionality to this class so that we can pass it an actual map, and then it can create a user class's instance for us using that. So to do that, I'll click on options. And I'm going to basically say that I want to generate a copy with method. And then once I've said that I want a copy with method, I can also say that I don't want this class to be just types only. And this is basically going to add some other useful features to my class that are going to allow me to basically take in an actual map and then return a user objects instance. So then what we can do is just copy all of this code like so. Come back to my actual code, go to the lib folder, and here I'm going to create a new folder now called models. Within this, I'm going to create a new file called user.dart. And then within this, I'm going to paste all of the code that we had generated using QuickType. And that's pretty much it. So now that we've done this, what I can do is basically remove all of the stuff that you see at the top here. We don't need two of these things. Don't need Dart convert as well, and do command save, and we can remove these comments as well. And then we can come back to our actual auth service. So within my auth service, what I want to do is that I want to say that basically, if we made sure that our response is correct, I want to create a user variable. I want to set that equal to a new instance of our user object. So how do we do that? Well, firstly, I'll come to my auth service. And here I'm going to say that my auth service is going to have a variable of type user, which is going to be optional. We'll import this class, obviously, from models/users.dart. And then I'm going to say it's going to be called user, like so. And then I'm going to say that we're going to be importing this from /models/user.dart. Then I'll come back and I'll say now user is going to be equal to user.fromJSON. And here I'm going to pass the response.data like so. And that's all we had to do. So now what happens is that we pass it the map, and this factory function that's on the user class takes in all of this map data, as you can see, and then returns a new instance of the user object to us. That's pretty much all we had to do. So now if I print user to the console, and let's open up the debug console once again, you can see that if I restart my application, click login, it's going to print to the console instance of user. So basically it's telling us that we are printing to the actual debug console an instance of the user object. There we go. That's pretty much all we had to do. And we're actually saving this information within our actual auth service as well. And we'll come back to this later on, but this is very cool. So now that this is done, the last thing that I want to do is that I want to update my HTTP service and let it know that now that we've authenticated our user, that for all the other subsequent requests that we're going to be sending using the HTTP service, that I want to include the JWT token that we have received as a response from auth/login within those requests. So to do that, it's going to be very simple. All I'm going to be doing is once I have actually made sure that the user is now going to be having a value, I'm going to do HTTP service dot, and I'm going to call the setup function on it again. And if you remember correctly, what setup basically does is that it defines the options that DO is going to use as well as the headers, and then tells DO to use these options. So I'll come back and I'm going to say that now we're going to call setup, but this time we are going to pass a bearer token to the setup. And this is going to be the user, and then specifically the token property on the user, like so. And that's pretty much all we had to do, and do command save. And there we have it. Now everything seems to be working. And the final thing I'm going to do is return true and do command save. So now with this done, we are now actually ready to test the complete login flow. So to do that, I will come back to my actual login_page.dart file, come to where the login button is, the on-pressed callback, and then let's see what we get for the result. So once we've actually called the login function, we wait for it to complete, and then we put the actual operations return value into result. So let's see what the result is. So let's print the result to the console, like so, and then restart our application. And if I keep the username and password the same and press login, you can see that it should return true. If I change the username to be incorrect or the password to be incorrect and I press login, it's going to return false, and everything seems to be working as we had intended to work. So now the last thing that we need to do is just basically implement some kind of a functionality within our application that will allow us to actually display a pop-up to the user, or a dialog I should say, which lets the user know if the actual login operation was unsuccessful. So to do that, what we're going to be doing is actually using a package called status alert, and it allows us to basically create these beautiful dialogues pop up on the screen of our actual Flutter application to tell the user about something that has happened. So let's copy this package, and similar to what we've done before, let's come back to pubspec.yaml to the dependency section, and after do, paste in status alert and do command save. Let's make sure the Flutter pub gets called, and then stop running our application, and then we should start running our application again. Then once our application is running again, all we have to do is basically say that if the result that we get from our actual login operation is true, so that means if result, then for now we don't do anything else. We are going to be doing something. Well, what are we going to be doing? Well, basically what I'll do is that I'll use the status alert package, and on that I'll say that status alert dot show, and then we pass it the context. That's one thing that it needs. But besides this, I'm going to set the duration for the status. So how long is this pop-up going to be appearing on the screen if the user doesn't dismiss it? I'm going to say it's going to be duration, seconds, and 2. So for 2 seconds, I want the status alert to be shown. Then what I'm going to do is set the title property, and this is going to be login failed, like so. Then I'm going to say what the subtitle for this is going to be, and that will be please try again. And then after this, I'll say that the configuration property for this is going to be const icon configuration. And I'm going to say that the icon that's going to be displayed for this is going to be icons.error. And finally, the last thing that I'm going to be doing is setting the max width property to be 260 and do command save. So now with this done, I'm going to restart my application. And if I change the username to be something that's incorrect and press login, you're going to see that it tells me login failed, please try again, and then it beautifully dismisses. So there we have it. Now we've successfully implemented the complete login functionality within our actual recipe book app. The next thing we need to do is actually, once we made sure that the login was successful, is redirect the user to the actual home page. And then we can actually work on the home page and how the UI for the home page should look. To navigate to the home page from our login page, now that all of the authentication logic has been implemented, we have to implement navigation within Flutter. And the way we're going to be implementing navigation is by using no package, just bare bones navigation implementation using whatever tools we have at our disposal using Flutter. So let's take a look at it. So to implement navigation, what we're going to be doing is going to our main.dart file. And here on my main.dart file, as I had mentioned to you guys, at the very top of our widget tree, we have a material app. Our material app, if you hover over it, provides us an actual property that we can pass to it called routes, which basically define all of the different pages that we can go to in our application. And we're going to be using this property to actually develop some of the navigation logic for our application. So how do we work with routes? Well, the first thing that I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to remove the home property, because when we're working with routes, we don't use the home property, and I'm going to set the routes property to an empty map for now. And if I hover over this, you're going to see that the actual routes expect us to basically give it a map, and this map basically needs to have strings as its keys and then widget builder functions as its values. So what this basically means is that the key for the route is the actual route's name, I should say, and then how this route is built is basically defined as a function where we pass the context to this function, and then we basically return what the actual route should look like. So if I go to /login, then what I want to do is return the login page. So here what I'm going to do, that I'm going to set the return value for this function to be equal to a new instance of our login page. And since I also want the ability to go to the home page, then what I'm going to be doing is adding another route here called /home. And then I'm going to say that we're going to basically get the context pass once again, but this time we're going to be returning our home page. But we haven't created our home page yet, so let's quickly create that. So to create my home page, what I'm going to be doing is coming to pages, creating a new folder here, or a new file, I should say, call it homepage.dart. Once I've opened it up, here I'm also going to be creating a stateful widget, but now I'm going to quickly breeze through it because you guys already understand how to create stateful widgets or what the basic skeleton of one is. And then I'm going to give my widget the name of home page. So what I've basically done is that I've quickly created a home page class, which is a stateful widget. And then I've also created the corresponding home page state class for the stateful widget. Then for the build function, I am going to be returning a scaffold once again because this is a new page in our application. And that's pretty much it. Now that this is done, I'm just going to quickly define the app bar for my scaffold, and this is going to be an instance of an app bar. Here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give it a title, and the title in this case is going to be a text widget where we are going to say receipt book like so. And then once this is done, I'm going to add the center title property and say that we are going to center the title, and that's pretty much it. With this done, the last thing that I'll do is that for my scaffold, I'll define the body property. Now I'm going to say that this is going to be a call to function called build UI. Then, as we had done before, I'll say that I'll create a function which returns a widget. It's called _build UI. And for now, it just returns an empty container. We'll talk about what container widgets are, but let's just do command save and call it a day. Then I'll add a const here, because our text widget is not going to be changing. I'll close down all of these different files. I'll come back to my main.dart, and now I'm going to say that for the /home route, I want to return an instance of our home page like so. And that's pretty much it. So with this done, I'm going to stop running my application because we're going to get an error if we try to run it right now. And before we can start it again, I'm going to set the initial root property on the material app to be one of the keys in this roots map. So what I want to do is that when the material app initially loads, I want to direct the user to the login page. So I'm going to take whatever key that corresponds to the login page is and pass that as the initial root. With this done, I will say start debugging once again. And this time we have now changed the logic within our material app to not depend on the home property to actually render a page, but actually use the roots and the initial root property to determine what page needs to be shown. So now that we're using the login page, let's go back to our login page and let's see how we can navigate from our login page on a successful login to our home page. So to do this, what I'm going to be doing is coming back to my login button, then the elevated button and on pressed callback. Here, when we were basically checking if the result for our actual login operation is a success or true, I should say, then what I want to do is navigate to my actual home page. So how do we do that? Well, basically, we are going to use the navigator object. And then on that, we have a function that's called push replacement name. And the reason I'm using push replacement names is that it's basically going to replace the current screen with the new screen that we pass here. And it's not going to allow the user to go back. So it's going to entirely remove the current screen and replace it with the new screen without giving the user the ability to go back to the login page, because I don't want that. I want the user to log in and move on to the home page. I don't want them to have the ability to come back. And then here, what I'm going to do is pass the name of the root. So if you remember correctly, for our home page, the name for the root was /home. So that's why I've added it here like so. And that's pretty much it. So the last thing that I want to do before we just test this out is actually go to my services folder and then my HTTP service. And I just want to make one thing that we forgot to do. And that was that I want to basically to the headers add our bearer token as well, because we weren't doing that before. So we are now going to get past a bearer token if we log in and we get a token returned to us, and then we call setup again, and then I want to update the headers. So what I want to do here now is basically implement logic so that the bearer token is included within the headers if we pass it. So how can we do that? Well, it's basically going to be very simple. I'll just have a if statement where I'm going to say if the bearer token is not equals to null, then what I want to do is that to my headers, I want to set the authorization header to be the following, and it's going to be equal to this string where it's going to be bearer space, and then I'm going to interpolate the token within the string by doing $bearer token. And this is just an industry standard way of working with JWT token, where in our request header, we need to add an authorization header, and the value for that is bearer splash the actual bearer token. So with this then, let's do command say we're now good to go. Everything's working as intended. So hopefully, fingers crossed, if I click on login and the operation is a success, we are taken to our home page, as you can see. And now we can actually start working on building the UI for our homepage. So before we start building the UI, I think it's good for us to actually take a look at the design for our actual homepage. So let's open up the screenshot and let's see what's going on. So at the very top, we have our app bar, which has a title, which we've already implemented. And then below that, we have these buttons that we can use to actually filter through the actual recipes that are shown to us, below which we have a list view that's showing all of the recipes to us. So let's implement the top part first, which are all of these buttons that we can scroll through to select the meal types, and then we'll come to the list view. So to work with this, what I'm going to be doing is coming to my home_page.dart file, and I'm going to come to the build UI function. The first thing that I'm going to make sure is that I'm going to basically refactor and wrap my build UI function with a safe area widget just to make sure that my UI is always visible. And then we can move on to the build UI function. Within build UI, I'm going to be using a container, and to my container, I'm going to be passing a child, and this child is going to be a column. And the reason it's going to be a column is because at the top, we have this actual scrollable list of buttons that we can use to actually select our meal types. And then below that, we have a list view. So these are two different widgets, and to align widgets in a vertical fashion, we use a column, as I had shown you guys on the login page as well. So let's add a column widget. And then once we've added a column widget, let's add a children property to that. And for now, the children's list is empty. Then what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be basically creating a new function which returns a widget, and I'm going to give my function a name which says underscore receipt type buttons, and then I'm going to open this up. Here what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be returning a sized box widget like so. And before I continue with this, I'm going to take this function and I'm going to add this to the children's list for my column. And then for the sized box, what I'm going to be doing is setting the height to be 5% the height of the screen by doing what we were doing before using the media query. Now that this is done, I'm going to come and say that the child for this actual sized box is going to be a widget called a list view. And as the name implies, a list view is basically used to show a list of different widgets that we can scroll through to the user. So as you can see, if I go back to the design, we have the scrollable list of buttons. That's why we're going to be now using a list view. And then we're going to modify some parameters of this to actually allow us to horizontally scroll the list view. So let's come back to our list view and let's see what we're going to be doing here. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to change the scroll direction for my list view to be axis.horizontal. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want my list view to be horizontally scrollable, not vertically scrollable. And then similar to how a column works, a list view also has a list of children. So what are the actual elements, or the widgets I should say, that are going to live within this list view? So what I'm going to be doing now is that I'm going to basically say that I'm going to have a filled button. And this is another button widget that is provided to us, similar to how we used a button widget inside of our login button on our login page called elevated button. Another button type that we have is called a filled button. Once I have defined the filled button, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is that for the onPressed property, so what happens when this button is pressed, I'm going to leave that to be empty for now. And then for the child of this, I'm going to say that I'm going to have a constant text widget. And for now, it's going to say the following, and that's going to be snack, like so, and do command save. And then I'm just going to add the remaining trailing commas just to make sure that everything looks good. And as you can see, now we have a filled button that is appearing and we can click on it. I'm also going to add before the snack, the carrot emoji, then a space, then snack, just so that it looks a bit nice. And then the last thing that I'm going to be doing is that on my filled button, I'm going to be basically wrapping that with a padding widget. I want to give some padding to my actual filled button. So I'm going to say that we're going to have a padding widget, and then padding is going to be const. And then I'm going to do the following padding. I want to add padding, which is going to be edge insets.symmetric, which basically means that I want to add the same amount of padding on the horizontal axis. So that means on the left and right, which needs to be 5.0. So 5.0 on the right, 5.0 on the left. That's why I've used the following padding property. And there we go. Now our button is being shown to us. So now what I'm going to be doing is basically I'll copy this padding widget. I'll paste it once again because we are going to have another button for breakfast, then one for lunch and one for dinner. So I need to paste it once more and then once more, making sure that all of these actual filled buttons are within the children's list, and do command save. And there we go. We are now seeing all of these buttons and we can scroll through them horizontally because we're using a list view. So if we were using a row, this wouldn't be possible. Because we're using a list view, we have the ability to scroll through them. And I'll come back to what a row is. But for now, I just wanted to let you know if you guys were confused as to why we didn't use a row. So if you want to make our actual list scrollable, then we need to use a list view. Now that this is done, I'm just going to quickly change the actual text on each of these buttons. So for the next one, it needs to be breakfast. Then after that, the next one needs to be lunch. So let's do that. And then the one after that needs to be dinner. So let's do that as well. There we have it. Now we have snack, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and everything looks great. So now that this is done, we can move on to the next step. And the next step entails actually pulling information from the API and then displaying these different recipes in a list view. So how are we going to be doing that? Well, first things first, what we can do is actually go to our API and actually see how the data is returned to us and where we're getting this data from. On dummyjson.com, I'm going to come to the sidebar, I'm going to scroll and I'm going to go to an endpoint which basically says get recipes by meal type. So once I come here, you're going to see that we can send a request to the following endpoint, and then it's going to return an output similar to this to us. What I want to do for now is skip the meal type property, and we're going to come to how we can filter the actual data that comes to us from the API later on. What for now I want to do is just grab all of the recipes that are on the actual API. So to do that, we're just going to be using the following endpoint uptail/recipes/. So if I copy this and I come back and I open up a new window on Google Chrome, paste it in and press enter, as you can see, this is the data that gets returned to us. We get a JSON object where we have the recipes key. For that, we have a list, and in that list, we have a bunch of objects, each of which relate to a single recipe. And this includes all of the information for the recipe, such as the ID, the name, what the actual ingredients for it are, and a whole bunch of other things like that. So now what I'm going to be doing is that I'm just going to be basically copying how one of these recipe objects look. So I can see that there's an actual curly bracket here. So this is the beginning of our object, and then it basically ends somewhere here like so. So I'm going to copy this. Then what I'll do is that I am going to be going back to the same website, which was quicktime.io/Dart, which we used to actually generate class for our user. And the reason we're doing this is because I want to make it easy for us to actually ingest the JSON from the API and then convert them into actual objects that we can interact with. So that's why we're actually creating the class first. And here I'm going to say that the name for my actual class, and let me increase the size, is going to be recipe. And then the JSON for that is going to be this. So I pasted that in. And then I'm going to say that it's going to make sure that I generate the copy with method, make sure that null safety is on, and types only, we just do not select that. And this is going to create all of the code that I need for my recipe class for me to take in a JSON object and then return an instance of a recipe object. I just copy this, then I will come back to my actual code. In the models folder, I'm going to create a new file, and this time I'm going to call it recipe.dart. And press enter, and then I'm going to paste all of the stuff here and do command save. Then at the very top, we can remove all of the stuff for the functions, including Dart convert and everything like that, and just leave the class. And there we have it. We have now done this. So the next step in the process is to now implement some kind of a mechanism within our application so that we can get data from our API. So how do we do that? Well, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to do the same thing that I've been doing before, where I'm going to create a service that will allow me to get data from the API. And I'm going to call the service data service. So I'm going to create a new service in a file called data_service. And then I'm going to say it's going to be .dart. Once this is done, I'm going to basically create a class, and I'm going to say this is going to be our data service class, like so, and then open it up. Within this, since I want the data service class to also have a singleton instance, what I'm going to be doing is doing the same thing that I've done with the auth service and HTTP service, where firstly I'm going to define a static variable of data service on my actual data service class. And then what I'm going to be doing after that is just defining the factory function for the data service. And then finally just defining the internal constructor like so, just to ensure that there always exists only a single instance of the data service within my application. With this done, I'm now going to be defining a function on the data service which will allow me to get recipes. So for now, this function will return a future, and the future will be a list of recipe, and this recipe class is going to come from the class that we had just created. We might fail fetching the data, so this is going to be optional. We might get the data, we might not. Depends on whether we have an internet connection or we are sending the correct request. And I'm going to call this function get recipes. Then I'm going to say that the actual parameter that gets passed to this function for now are nothing. It's an asynchronous function, and then I open up the function body. The actual URL where we're going to be sending the request to, or I should say path, is going to be equal to recipes / and the reason we're just doing recipes / is because within DO, we've already specified the API's base URL. So the base URL, if I open up the actual documentation again, is going to be up till the point, which is dummyjson.com /. So then after that, we just need to go to the recipes / endpoint. So that's why I've said that the path is going to be recipes /. And then after this, what I'm going to do is use my HTTP service to send the request. So let's firstly import our HTTP service in. So I'm going to create a variable on my data service. I'm going to say it's going to be final type HTTP service _ HTTP service and set it to HTTP service like so. Once this is done, I'll do command save, make sure that nothing gets broken, come back to get recipes. And here, what we can do is create a variable called var response and set this equal to a call to send a GET request. But if I go to my HTTP service for now, we don't have a function for sending GET requests. We have a function for sending POST requests, but not GET. So let's update our actual HTTP service. So to do that, I'm just basically going to be saying the following. I'll have a function which will return a future. This future will be of type response optional. It's going to be GET. We're going to pass it a path. It's going to be asynchronous. And then I'm going to open the function body. Then I'm going to add a try catch block. Within catch, what I'm going to be doing is just printing the error. And if we reach the very end of this function, I'm just going to return null. And then within the try block, this is what we're going to do. We'll create a variable final response, set that equal to await _ do / and then I'm going to do get. And get, I'm going to basically pass it the path like so. And that's pretty much it. And with that, I'm just going to say that we're going to return the response. And there we have it. Our get function has now been defined. So now you can see the actual power of breaking our code down into different services, pages, and models. And it's making our code easily readable. And we're following the DRY principle, which is don't repeat yourself. And this is one of the reasons why I opted for going the longer route in this actual tutorial, but actually making sure that you learn good practices and good development habits so that you become not only a competent Flutter developer, but somebody who also has good programming practices. So then I will come back to my data service, and now I'm going to access my HTTP service by doing _ HTTP service and then dot, and I'm going to call the get function. And here I'll pass the path like so. And then do not forget to make sure that you actually await this actual function. So I'm going to do await HTTP service.get. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the responses status code is equals to 200 and the responses data is not equals to null. So if that is the case, then what we can do is actually for now just print response dot data like so, and that's pretty much all I'm going to be doing. And I'm going to add an exclamation mark here because I know the data is going to be present. Now we can come back to our home page, and within our home page we can actually see how we can work with this now data service that we've defined to actually get our data. So to get the data, what I'm going to be doing is firstly, I'm going to be basically creating a new function within my home page. And this function is going to be called recipes list, and this function will return a widget. So recipes list like so. And then I'll open it up. And within this function, I'm going to return an expanded widget. And the reason I'm returning an expanded widget is because I want the list to take up all of the available space on the screen that's available to it. I do not want to define a specific size for this actual widget. So an expanded widget basically expands its child to take up all of the space that's available to it. And then the child for this is going to be a list view, as you can see, because we have a list view that we can use to scroll through the different recipes. But if I just implement a list view, and I'll show you what happens like so, we need to give it a list of children. But where do we get this list of children from? Where do we get the data from? How do we link the data with the list view? It's not making sense. Well, if we go back to our data service, and if you take a look at our get recipes function, I see that it returns a future. Well, Flutter conveniently provides us with a widget called the future builder that allows us to ingest futures in and then using those futures build our widgets. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing that I'm going to be doing is that I'll remove this list view for your guys' easy understanding. So let's remove it. And the child for this expanded widget is going to be a future builder, like so. Our future builder is going to require us to pass it two things. One is the actual future. So the future in this case is going to be the data service. So let's actually do that, data service. And then the function on it called get recipes. And then the builder is basically going to be a function that's going to determine how the child for this future builder is going to be built. And the builder is going to take in two things. It's going to take in a build context and it's going to take in a snapshot. And these will be the things that are going to be passed to us. And then the builder expects us to return a widget. So what I'm going to be doing for now is just returning a container. And then we'll come back to how we can actually work with the list view a bit more. But for now, let's just return a container, do command save. And now what's going to happen is that our future builder is basically going to run this future. And then once this future gets resolved, or while it is being resolved, it's going to call this builder function and then basically return some kind of a widget back. So what I want to do now is basically open up the debug console and kind of show you guys that the actual function is being run. So if I go to my debug console, restart my application, we are going to show the login page, click login. And if we come to our actual homepage, we're going to see that nothing is printed to the console. And the reason is because we're not using the recipes list function. So let's go to the very top, build UI function, column, after the recipe types button, let's add the recipes list, do command save. And this time, if I do this, as you can see, something gets printed to our debug console. And these are all of the different recipes. You can see all of the different recipes being printed. So this means that our data service function is being called by our future builder. So now we can come to our data service and actually code the remaining logic within the get recipes function. So now what I want to do is make sure that this function returns a list of recipes if everything works out the way it should. So I'm going to create a variable which is going to be a list. It's going to be called a data. It's going to be equal to the response dot data. And then on that specifically, I want to access the recipes like so. And then once this is done, I'm going to now convert this actual, say, map in this case into a list of recipe. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to create a list of type recipe. This is going to be a variable called recipes. I'm going to set that equal to data.map. So we're basically going to take all of the values that exist within our data list. And for each of them, we are basically going to transform them into a recipe object by doing recipe.fromJSON and passing it the element that gets passed to us. And then finally, once this is done, I'm going to cast this to a list like so. So what this is going to do is that it's basically going to go through each of the elements that are within our list. And then it's going to convert them into a recipe object. And then we'll basically get a iterable returned back to us, as you can see. So I'm going to cast that iterable to a list to fix any errors. And that's pretty much it. So now we have our recipes list created. So the final thing I'm going to do is return the recipes like so and do command save. But before I do that, I'm also going to print the recipes to the console because I want to show you guys something. And if I restart my application, login, you're going to see that in our console, after some time, we're going to get an output where we're going to say that there's a list which has instance of recipe objects within it. So you can see how now we have these recipe objects available to us and we can use these later on. You guys are going to see how this is going to make our life much easier. So now that this is done, we can go back to our future builder and see what we need to do there. So our future is going to take some time to resolve because this is a network request. We're going to send some information to the API and then we'll wait for the API to respond back to us. When something is happening and we do not have the data ready, what I want to do is actually basically show a loading indicator. So how can I do that? Well, to do that, what I'll do is that I will basically, inside of the builder, say that if the snapshot.connection state is equal to connection state dot waiting, like so. Then what I want to do is that I want to return a circular progress indicator widget like so, and do Command save. So you can see that the circular progress indicator was shown to us. And then to fix its styling and put it in the center, I'm going to wrap this with a widget, and this is going to be a center widget. So a center widget puts its child within the center of its parent, and do Command save. And there we go. Now we're seeing this circular progress indicator in the center, like so. Then what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be adding another if statement where I say that if the snapshot has error, if an error occurred during the resolution of our future, then what I want to do is that I'm going to return a center widget, which is going to have a child. And this time the child is going to be a text widget that I'll just copy and paste in, which is going to say unable to load data. And there we have it. So if our snapshot's connection state is not waiting and our snapshot doesn't have error, that basically means that most probably we now have the data and we can show it. So now what I want to do is that instead of returning a container, I'm going to return a list view. But this time we're not going to be using the default list view constructor. We're going to be using the listview.builder function. And the reason we're going to be doing this is because this is going to allow us to programmatically create our list view. So our listview.builder is going to expect us to pass it an item builder property, which is a function which basically defines how each of the children within our list view are built. And this basic function gets two things passed to it, a context and then an index. And what this index is will be explained to you in just a bit. The index basically refers to the actual item that is being built. And this links to the actual property on the list view builder called an item count. So this basically refers to how many items are there going to be within our list view. Well, in our case, the amount of items we want to show within our list view is going to be the snapshot that gets passed to us, and then the data property on it, which is going to be a list of recipes, and then the length property on that, like so. And I can add an exclamation mark because I am sure that there is going to be data available to us, like so, and do Command save. So now with this done, within my item builder, what type of a widget am I going to be returning? Well, there's a very handy convenient widget that Flutter already provides us to display data within a list view called a list tile. So we are going to be using that. So I'm going to say we will return a list tile like so, and do Command save. And now we are not going to be seeing anything, but as soon as I come to my list tile and I say that the title property for this list tile is going to be a text widget, and the text here is going to be the actual specific recipe that is being rendered. So how do we know what recipe is this list tile going to be for? Well, I have the index passed to me. So what I can do is I can create a variable of type recipe, call it recipe, and this is going to be the specific item in the snapshot.data list at the specific index that gets passed to me. And then I can use this recipe and access its title like so by doing recipe, and then I am going to do name. And this is the reason why I opted for converting the map to an actual list of recipe object so that we have IntelliSense available to us, and it makes our coding much easier. And it's also going to make sure that we write much less error-prone code, because the probability of us writing something that doesn't work gets reduced a lot. If I do Command save now, you're going to see that once it loads all of the data, it displays all of that to me here, and I can scroll through this list view as you can see. So now all we have to do is basically make the list tile look as pretty as it looks on the actual screenshots, and then we should be almost done with our home page. So let's do that. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the is3line property on my list tile to be true. Then after that, I'm going to add the subtitle property. And for now, I'll stop running my application to avoid this error. And the subtitle property is going to be a text widget, like so. The text here is going to be two things. If I show you guys the actual design, it's going to be the actual cuisine type and then the difficulty. So let's add that. So what I'm going to do is use a string. Within that, I'm going to interpolate first the recipe's actual cuisine. And then I'm going to go onto a new line. So to break onto a new line, I'm going to use \n. This basically means a new line. And then I'm going to say that the difficulty is going to be difficulty, like so. And then a colon, space. And then I'm going to interpolate the recipe's difficulty like so. And that's pretty much it. So now I'll do Command Save. And I will run my application again. And this time we're going to have a subtitle appearing with the actual recipes, cuisine, and difficulty as well. So now that our application is running once again, let's log in and let's see what happens. So now our list tile is showing us the cuisine type as well as the difficulty. So the next step in the process is going to be to show this image. To show the image, what I'm going to be doing is setting the leading property for my actual list tile. And I'm going to say that it's going to be image. And as you can see, the image widget is used when we want to display image. And more specifically, I'm going to use the constructor called image.network because we are going to be showing an image that's on the network. And here we pass it a URL, and this URL can come from recipe dot, and then I'm going to do recipe dot image, and there we have it. If I do Command Save, now you're going to see that the image is being shown to us. Fantastic. So now that we're showing the image, the last thing that we need to add to our list tile is this actual text here, which shows the rating for the actual recipe. So for that, what I'll do is that I will come back and I'm going to add a trailing property to my list tile. It's going to be a text widget. And here what I'm going to do is basically interpolate the recipe.rating, and then I'm going to convert that to string, like so. And then after that, I'm also going to add a space, following that a star emoji, like so, and do Command Save. And there we have it. We have the star showing as well. I want to increase the text size for this, so I'm going to change the styling property for this text to be font size, and then I'm going to do 15, like so. Command Save, and there we have it. Now the size should be increased and it should look much bigger. So the last thing I want to do is basically add some spacing between these list tiles, because for now they're bunched together a lot. I want to add some spacing between them. So for this, what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be employing the same technique we had done before, where we're going to be adding some padding to our actual widget. On our list tile, we already have a property called content padding, so we can utilize that. And to this, I'm going to pass agentsets. And this time I only want to add padding to the top. So I'm going to do agentsets.only. And I'm going to say on the top, I want to add 20 pixels. Command Save. And there we go. Now we're just adding to the top 20 pixels. And that's pretty much it. The last thing that I want to do now on the actual UI design side of things is add some padding to the whole body of my scaffold, because it's reaching the extent of the width of our screen. So to do that, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go to the very top to where I have my actual column. And if you remember before, we had wrapped our column with a container. So let's change that to be a padding widget. And then let's give it some padding. And this is going to be agentsets. And this time I want the padding to be applied from all four sides. So I'm going to do agentsets.all and then 10 pixels from all sides. So top, left, and bottom. And there we go. Now we are applying padding, and the actual UI elements, or the widgets I should say, are not being extended to the very edge of the screen. And there we have it. So with this done, we basically implemented all of the functionality which pertains to the UI. So the last thing that we need to do is implement some kind of a mechanism so that we can actually click on these buttons and then actually filter through these recipes. So how are we going to be doing that? Well, if I go to dummyjson.com, and then if I come to get recipes by meal type endpoint, you can see that if I go to the endpoint, which is /recipes/meal-type/, and then here I pass the meal type, then it will only return those recipes to me which have the meal type of snack, as you can see. And if I change this to dinner, then it's just going to be dinner recipes. So how do we implement this kind of a logic? Well, first thing what I want to do is that I want to track what actual filter is currently active. So to do that, what I'll do is that I'll come to my home page state class. I'm going to create a variable here. I'm going to call this string. I'm going to call this meal type filter, and initially it's just going to be an empty string. Once this is done, what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to come to the recipes type buttons, and for each of the buttons, when they get pressed, I'm going to call set state. And within set state, I'm going to set the meal type filter to be equal to whatever button that was pressed. So in the case when we press the snack button, I want to set this to snack. Then I'll just copy this and I'll come to the next one. And for breakfast, I want to set this to breakfast, like so. And then for lunch, I want to set this to lunch. And then for dinner, I want to set this to dinner. Once this is done, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is going back to my data service. And on my data service, I'm going to say that now my get recipes function is going to get passed a parameter to it, which is going to be filter. And then what we're going to be doing is basically, once we've actually established what our path is, after that, I'm going to do is our filter not empty. So if our filter is not empty, then what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be basically appending to the path the following endpoint, and that is meal dash type / and then I'm going to add the filter like so. So we're just going to be adding to the actual path the following, and then the remaining logic remains the same. Now this path will be used, and then the data that gets returned to the API will only be the recipes which conform to the filter that we have defined. So let's come back to our home page. Now the last thing that I'm going to be doing is coming back to my recipes list to get recipes. And here I'm going to pass my meal type filter and then do command save. And there we have it. All of the logic has now been implemented. So the way this is going to work is that every time set state gets called when we click on one of these buttons, we not only update what the meal type filter variable is holding, but we also, because of calling set state, cause a widget tree rebuild. And when the widget tree gets rebuilt, then what happens is that our future builder calls the data service.getRecipes function with the new meal type filter, and then only the recipes that pertain to the filter that we have specified are shown in the list view. So now if I do command save, we can see that we are seeing all of the recipes. As soon as I click on snack, it only shows us snacks. Breakfast only shows us breakfast. Lunch only shows us lunch. So that pretty much concludes all of the functionality for our homepage, except for one thing, and that is when we click on these list tiles, we are navigated to our recipe detail page. So to navigate to the recipe page from our homepage so that we can view all of the details for our actual recipe, I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently than just setting up a route. What I want to do is basically pass all of the data to the page and then have the page create itself. And this is going to be a dynamic process. So to do this, what we're going to be doing firstly is that we are going to be coming to our home page and then specifically to the function, which is recipes list. And here I'm going to be coming to my list view.builder. Then where I return my list tile, now what I'm going to be doing is on that, I'm going to be setting a callback function for on tap. So basically when we tap on the tile, what is going to happen? So now if I click on one of these, you're going to see that we have this tap animation happening, but nothing's happening. So now we work towards the logic of actually navigating from our home page to our recipe detail page. So to do that, the first thing that we have to do is actually create a recipe page. So let's, under our pages, create a new file called recipe_page.dart. And once this is done, inside of my recipe page, I'm going to be creating a stateless widget class. And the reason for that is because our recipe page does not need to manage any kind of state. All of the data that it requires will be given to it, and then it doesn't need to change anything within itself during the actual lifecycle of it. So to create a stateless widget, all I'm going to do is create a class. I'm going to call that recipe page. I'm going to say that this is going to extend a stateless widget. And once this is done, I am going to implement the build function within my recipe page. And then for now, as we have been doing before, I'm going to return a scaffold like so, and within the scaffold, I'm going to set the app bar property. So what do I set the app bar to? Well, this time what I'm going to do is just set the app bar to the following, because you already know how app bar works, and do command save. And then the last thing I'm going to be doing is for my scaffold, I'm going to set the body property to a function called build UI. And then I will come to the actual bottom of my class, create the build UI function, and then I'm going to say that this is going to return, and we will use a column for now, which is going to have a children's list, which for now is going to be empty. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now that this is done, our recipe page requires some information regarding the actual recipe that it needs to display. So how do we accomplish that when we navigate to this page? Well, firstly, let's actually take a look at what our actual recipe page looks like. So it has the image, a bunch of details about the recipe, and then instructions on how to cook it. Okay, so now if I take a look back at my home page, you are going to see that we basically have access to our recipe object, and we can pass this on to our recipe page, and then the recipe page can actually use this to display information. So to do this, we are going to come to our onTap function, and here I'm going to use the function called navigator.push. So the reason I'm using push this time is because I want the ability for the user to navigate back to the page they came from. And the way we do that is by using the push method. If I used push replacement, then we would have completely replaced the home page and we wouldn't have the ability to come back. So that's why we're using push, and this is going to put our recipe page in the navigation stack on top of the home page. And then we have to pass it an actual route. So this route is going to be a material page route, and what this object basically allows us to do is programmatically build our route instead of having to define them in the actual routes map on our material app. So here the builder function is going to work similar to how builder functions have been working in Flutter. We'll get a context passed to us, and then we basically need to return what the route is going to look like. So in my case, what I'll do is that I'll return an instance of our recipe page, and that's pretty much it, and do command save. So now that this is done, if I click on one of these list tiles, it's going to navigate me to my recipe page, and you can see that since we are actually using an app bar and we use the push function on the navigator to actually push the recipe page onto the navigation stack, we are automatically seeing a button on the app bar that we can use to go back to the previous page. So this is the power of using an app bar and the navigator object. So the next thing I want to do is give the recipe that I want to display the details about to the recipe page. So to do that, what I'll do is that on my recipe page, I am going to create a variable which is going to be of type recipe, and then it's going to be called recipe, like so. And I'm also going to mark this variable as final. Now that this is done, I'm going to basically create the constructor for my recipe page class, and I'm going to say that this is going to get a required named argument, which is going to be this.recipe, like so. And once this is done, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is coming back to my home page, to the recipe page, where I'm creating it in my material page route. And here I'm going to say that the recipe is going to be equal to the recipe that we are accessing from the snapshot data list at the specific index. And that's all we have to do. So now with this done, we can actually close down our home page because all of the functionality for that is done, and go back to our recipe page. And let's actually take a look at what the UI for that is going to look like. So on my recipe page, I have an image. Following that, I have some text, title, prep time, and all of the different information regarding the ingredients. But if we can kind of take a look at the layout, we can actually see that this is actually a column in action. So first things first, we got to add a column. So to do that, what I am going to be doing is coming back to my column, and we already added it, so we can move to the next step. So the first step is to actually create a widget which will show the recipes image. So to do that, what I'm going to say is that within the columns children's list, I'm going to have a call to a function called recipe image, and then I'll create this function at the bottom, and it'll return a widget. Then within this function, I'm going to return a container widget, like so. This container widget is going to have a height and a width. The width will be the complete width of the screen. The height will be 40%. And we need to pass the build context. So let me pass that as a parameter to the function. Then I need to also add the build context here to the build UI function. Then where I call my recipe image, I'll pass this context. And finally, where I call build UI, I'm going to pass the context like so, and do command save. So now within my recipe image, the next thing that I want to do is that I want to add an image to my container. So to do that, I'll set the decoration property on my container, and this is going to be of type box decoration. Then on this, I can access a property called image, and this is going to be the image that I want to display. Since I want to display an image that is going to be over the network, I'm going to use the network image. If you were using, for example, asset images, then you would use asset image here. So I'm going to do network image like so. And then here we can actually just pass the link to the actual URL for the image. So we will get that by doing recipe.image like so. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So then once this is done, it's going to give me an error saying that I can't give the network image to the image property on my box decoration. And the reason for that is because the image it expects is of type decoration image, and then the image property for that is going to be network image. So let's do command save, and let's see that the image is being shown to us. So that's fantastic. Now I want to change the fit for the image so that it takes up the complete space of our container. So to do that, on my decoration image, I'm going to have a property called fit, and I'm going to set that to be boxfit.cover. And there we go. One more thing that I want to do is that I want this image to basically go behind the actual app bar. So to do this, I'm going to go back to my scaffold, and on my scaffold, I'm going to have something that says extend body behind app bar, and I'll set that property to true, do command save. And now you can see that the image moves up and our actual body for our scaffold is behind our app bar as well. So that's great. So the next thing that I want to do now is actually create the widget, which is going to be responsible for showing us some key details at the top regarding the cuisine, how easy it is to create this, the name of the recipe, the prep time, cook time, and things like that. So to do this, what I'll do is that I will come back again to my build UI function. I am going to say that we're going to have a function that's going to be called recipe details, and it's going to have the context passed to it like so. Then what I'll do is that I will come to the bottom of my class, and here what I'm going to be doing is basically creating a new function, recipe details, and then it's going to take in a build context, and then I'll open up the body for this. Within this, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to return a container. So let me do that. The color for the container is going to be colors.white. And then after this, I'm going to set the width for the container to be the complete width of the actual device. Once this is done, I'm going to add some children to my container, and in this case we're going to be using a column, and then I'm going to set the children's list for that to be empty for now. And the reason we're using a column is because our recipe details is going to be all of this text, which includes some text at the top, then the actual title, then the prep time, and then the reviews. So all of this is going to be stacked in a vertical manner, so that's why we're using a column. So now that this is done, what I'm going to be doing is coming to the children's list, and here I'm going to add a text widget. And I'm going to say that firstly, we're going to show the cuisine. So to do that, I will create a string, and within that, I'm going to interpolate the recipe dot and then cuisine. Once this is done, I am then going to add a comma. And after that, I'm going to again interpolate within the string the widget, the recipe dot difficulty. And once this is done, I'll do command save to see how it looks like. And as you can see, we can see that it's saying Italian, easy. So we can see both of the things now. Once this is done, I'll just quickly update the styling for the text. So this time I want to change the font size and the font weight like so. And then I want to change the actual alignment properties for the children that exist within my column. So what I'll do is I'll come to my column and I'll say that we'll basically set the main axis size to main axis size max, main axis alignment to be main axis alignment dot space evenly, and then the cross-axis alignment to be cross-axis alignment dot start, like so. Once this is done, I will also add some padding to the actual column because it's going way too far into the edge of the device. So to do that, I will set the padding property on the actual container, and I'll say it's going to be edge insets dot symmetric. So vertical means that it's going to be 15 pixels from the top, 15 from the bottom, and horizontal means 20 from the right and 20 from the left. And there we go. Now it looks much better. Once this is done, I'm basically going to be adding another text widget, and this is going to be the recipe's name. So I'll do recipe.name. And once this is done, let's see how it looks. So I want to change the styling for this. So I'll update the styling property like so and do command save. And there we go. Now it's looking good. Once this is done, I will copy the first text widget, and I will then take it to the bottom and add it after the last one that we had added. And this time what I want to do is show the prep time. So I'll do prep time, and then I will basically say recipe.prep time minutes like so. And then after that, I'll have a space and I'll say minutes. And then once this is done, I am going to then have a space, and then I'm going to say cook time. And the cook time is going to be the recipe, then cook time minutes like so. And then after this, I'll have another space and I'll say minutes and do command save. And there we go. We can see prep time 20 minutes, cook time 15. I'll update the actual font size to be 15, and then the font weight will be W300. Now that this is done, the last thing that I want to do is show the ratings related stuff. So I will again copy this text widget. I will paste it once more. And this time I want to basically show the rating. So to show the rating, I'm going to do recipe.rating and then .toString. And then I am basically going to, after this, remove the minutes and actually add a star emoji here, like so, and do command save. And there we go, we can see 4.6 star. And then instead of showing the cook time, what I'm going to be showing are the amount of reviews that this recipe has. So to do that, what I'm going to be doing is basically where I'm interpolating. I'm going to do recipe.review count. And I'm gonna say, instead of minutes, it's going to be reviews. And there we go. And the last thing I'm going to be doing is just changing the font size to be W500. And it looks amazing now. We can see all of the detail relevant to this actual recipe. If I go back now and I click on a new one, you're going to see that our recipe page is going to show details for the recipe that we click on, because that's the data that we're passing to it. So now we can move on to the next step, and that is to actually show the ingredients list. So let's do that. So the logic for this will remain the same. The first thing that we are going to be doing is basically going back to our build UI function. And here what I'm going to be doing is adding a call to a new function, which I'm going to call _recipe ingredients. And then we will pass the context to this as well. Once this is done, I will come to the bottom of my class, and similarly to what I've been doing before, I will create a function which returns a widget called recipe ingredients. I'll say that I'll take in build context like so. And then once this is done, I'll open up the body for this. So within the body, what I am going to be doing is basically returning a container. And then the color for the container is going to be colors.white. And let's do command save, make sure that nothing's broken. Then for the width of this, it's going to be the complete width of the size of the device. And then I'm going to set the same padding as I had done before for the recipe details. And then finally, what I'm going to be doing is setting the children for this to be a column. And the reason we're using a column is because, again, we are going to be displaying ingredients like so. So that's why I'm using a column. And the reason I'm not using a list view is because I don't want this list to be scrollable. I just want them to be shown, not scrollable. So that's why we're using a column. Then for the column, what I'm going to basically do is that I'm going to set the children's list. And this time what I want to do is dynamically generate this children's list. So the way we're going to be doing this is we will take our recipe and we'll access the ingredients list on it. And then I will map over it. And for each of the ingredients that I get, so let's do that. And then instead of an arrow function, let's just use a normal anonymous function closure. I will return a row widget. And then for the children of this, for now, it's going to be an empty list. And then finally, I will cast this to be a list. And this should fix most of the errors for us. And I will also add a semicolon here. So the reason we're returning a row is because if I take a look at the actual elements that are going to be within my column, there's going to be a checkbox. Following that, it's going to be the actual name of the ingredient. So that's why we need a row, and a row is a widget similar to a column, but this time it allows us to embed children within it, and it's going to align them in a horizontal manner. So the main axis alignment for a row is going to be the horizontal axis. And then what I'm going to do here is firstly, I'm going to basically add an icon widget. So an icon widget can be used to display icons, and I'm going to do icons.checkbox. And let's do command save to actually see how it looks. It looks fantastic. And then after this, I'm going to basically add a text widget, and I'm going to basically show the ingredient here, which we can access by doing I, and do command save. And now we're seeing the ingredient as well. I want to add some spacing between these. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to basically change the text to be a string. I'll add a space before I actually interpolate the ingredient within the string. This way it should add some space, and do command save. So now that we're showing the ingredients as well, the last thing that I want to show are the instructions for our recipe. So to do that, what I will do is the same structure that we've been doing before, which is I'll come back to the top where I have my build UI. I will have my recipe instructions function after the ingredients. The context will be passed to this as well. And then I will come to the very bottom of my class. I will say that we will have a function that will return a widget. It's going to be called recipe instructions. It's going to get the build context passed to it, and then I'll open up its body. Within this, what I'm going to be doing is similar to what I've been doing before, return a container. So let me copy the code from the actual recipe ingredients function and come and paste it here. And then the child for this is going to be a column like so, and it's going to have a children's list, which for now is going to be empty. And then I will add the remaining brackets and the semicolon and do command save just to make sure that nothing's broken. Then, since the actual instructions are also going to be dynamic because they might differ depending upon what recipe we're looking at, I'm going to do the same logic that I've done for the ingredients, where for the columns children's list, what I'll do is that I will say that I will access the recipe and I will access the instructions on it, and then I will map over them. And then for each instruction that I get, I am going to basically remove this arrow function, create a normal anonymous function, then cast this to a list. So this fixes all of the errors for us. Here, what I'm going to be doing is basically returning a text widget like so. And that's pretty much it. And then within this text widget, I will add the actual instruction. And if I do command save now, hopefully the instructions should be shown. But I want to basically fix the styling of these, so let's do that. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to say that each instruction can only take a maximum of 3 lines. And then I want to set the text align property for them to be text align dot start. And then finally, what I'm going to do is set the styling property for my actual text to be const text style. And then I will do font size and I will do 15.0 command save, and there we have it. And we'll fix this overflow error. There's a particular reason for why I wanted to show you this. So now that this is done, the last thing that I'm going to be doing is basically fixing up some of the actual parameters on my column to fix the alignment. So the main axis size will be main axis size dot maximum. I want to basically on the main axis align the children from the start. So I'll do main axis alignment dot start. And then for the cross axis alignment, I also want to do dot start, and this should basically put everything on the left side. And that's pretty much it. So now the last thing I want to do is fix this bottom overflow error. Now there are many different ways in which you can approach these overflow errors, and during your Flutter development, there are going to be many instances where this might pop up. And the solution to these depends on the actual context in which you are coding. In my case, I know for sure that there are going to be situations in which the content that needs to be displayed on the recipe page might extend beyond the total available height to us on the actual mobile device or the actual device that this application is running on. So what I want to do is make my body scrollable so that we can scroll through and see more of the content. So how can we do that? Well, a good way to do this would be to actually go to the very top where I have my build UI function. And before I return my column, what I'm going to be doing is basically wrapping my column in a widget. And this widget is going to be a single child scroll wheel. So as the name of this widget implies, it basically allows us to give it a single child and it makes that child scrollable. And as soon as I do this and do command save, the actual error that we were getting is now going to be not visible on the screen anymore. And if I actually try to scroll the screen, you're going to see that now we can actually scroll through our screen and actually scroll through the content of our actual scaffold. So this is the reason why I decided to do that. So once this is done, what we can do now is actually give a proper test run to our application, because now we've completed all of the actual functionality. So congratulations on making it thus far into the actual video. And as always, if you want to support me, then consider downloading the actual source code for this project. A link to that will be down in the description below, as well as subscribing to my channel so that you get notified every time I release a new video. But let's go back and let's try to actually access another recipe. So let's do this shrimp scampi. And as you can see, all of the information is being displayed to us. So one thing that I can see is that for my instructions, I want to add some numbers to them. So how do I do that? Well, what I can do is actually go back to my actual recipes instruction to the column, and then where I'm mapping over the instructions. And here for the text widget, instead of just showing the instruction, I will use a string. In this string, firstly, I'm going to interpolate the index. So to do that, what I will do is do recipe dot instructions and then dot index of the specific instruction that we are showing, and do command save. So now we are seeing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then after this, I will have a space. And then I will basically add the actual instruction like so. And then after this, I'll add a new line as well, just to add some spacing between these instructions. And I forgot a full stop here, so let's do that. And there we go. Now our instructions are looking much better and there's spacing between them. So there we go. Now everything looks the way we anticipated it to be. So one final thing I'd like to do is basically stop running this application on the Android simulator and open up an iOS simulator and just test the application of iOS and see if we're getting any kind of issues regarding the actual layout or styling of our application, and make sure that the UI looks the same on iOS as well. So let's start debugging, and once the application is running on the simulator, I will resume the video. So welcome back everybody. As you can see, now the application is running on the iOS simulator as well. All of the logic looks good. If I input a wrong username, it tells me login failed. If I actually create the correct username and then press login, it logs me in into the recipe book page. The UI looks great. I can scroll through everything. The filters are working the way we want them to. I can click on each of these recipes and it takes me to the recipes actual detail page, and everything looks good and there are no actual pixel overflow errors. So with that, I can say that we can conclude the tutorial here. As always, if you enjoyed the video, then please don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe to my channel so that you get notified every time I release a new video. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, keep learning, keep growing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.